you ask me about poetry, its purpose, its function, and its raison d'etre, it is an echo and a memory of a time and a place. It is a response to the human existence, to the idea of I am here, I was here, I existed. Woof, woof, woof. It all began at midnight. This nightmare began. Like krasny, 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 coming from the lips of Lenin, lying there stiff as cardboard. Learn, 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 he says. What are we to learn from him? Failed lawyer after 70 years, still stiff. Dead at 55. But eternally young, deflated. Just like a balloon. Just another mummified corpse in the heart of Moscow. In the heart of Mother Russia. Inside a crystal tomb. What are we to learn from him? Just another mummy, a cadaver of wax and lipstick, formaldehyde, and desiccated flesh. Oh, Mother Russia, it all sounds more like krasny, krasny, krasony. Your bell does not ring anymore. It lies in rotting meat, its chunks polished to gold by touching perfection. Oh, Lenin, Lenin! Oh, Lenin! Corpse! Genius! Genius. My translator, Sasha, jokes with me. He says, do you think they kept his prick? Do you believe that it will rise? Lenin's brain, he explains to me, has been kept by science, preserved. Sliced into thin, transparent slices, preserved for the future, when science would someday understand what made Lenin great. What about his brick? Has it been sliced too? I love Russia! I love Mother Russia! I can't hear anything from the roar. Lenin, corpse, genius, founder of a nation of saints and drunkards, of poets who always hang themselves in winter, of statues in the park. Lenin, corpse, genius, frozen stiff cardboard phallus under the bored stare of the uniformed guards. Silence, one of them cries. Shh, silence. Shh. One of them cries. The honor guard is gone forever. Shh, silence, silence. Do not whisper. Respect, respect. Can't you see this man is sleeping? Can't you see this man is sleeping? I think the poets are the soul of a society. I think they represent the aspirations, the dreams, the inner voice of a human landscape. Like most kids raised here, I was raised on baseball and sports and the usual, hockey and stuff like that. So while I was in Canada, I remember going to the library and, with the kids at school, and there would be a section
I was interested in science, so I'd go to the paleontology section, you know, the dinosaur section, and right next to it was a section called poetry. And I remember looking up at the poetry and going, that's poetry, this is paleontology, and I kind of felt there was like a line between the two, and I was not to cross over. I don't know where I got that message from, but that, you know, of course, when you're a kid, you know, poetry is like for sissies, poetry is for, you know, that kind of attitude. But then what happened was when I was 12, my mother decided she wanted to go back to Italy, and myself and my family went back to southern Italy where I was raised, and my uncle Giovanni was a professor of Italian and a sculptor and a poet. And it was his task to teach me Italian when I was 12 to prepare for my junior high school exam. So I spent a year with him being my private tutor and preparing me for these exams. And he put me in a garden, and he put all these books in front of me in Italian and in English, most of which were books of poetry. And he said, I want you to read them. And he just left me to my own devices in this backyard, in this garden. One day he said to me, no, I want you to write some poems yourself. So when I was 11, I began to write poems. I was smitten, I was taken, because suddenly I was being transported to entire, not new worlds, but new universes. The thing about poetry, at least for me, is if you are really in the presence of a poetic a pulse, poetic life, you are really taken over and you are transported, much more so in some ways than novels. So I got locked and hooked on that stuff when I was 12 and 13, and then I started writing when we came back in English, and I've been writing ever since. Now, Moscow Dog literally began with woof, 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 because I was in Moscow at 2 o'clock in the morning and dogs were barking. And I woke up, I was in a state of insomnia, and as I lay there in bed in this apartment in downtown Moscow, which is an odd place to be, particularly if you grew up in the Cold War, as I did, to be lying now in what was then the heartland of the enemy, and to be in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning and hear these dogs bark, and suddenly realize that I felt completely that I knew this space very well. I had gone to see the body of Lenin as part of sort of this tourist thing, and you are put into a line, and there is a huge line around the block, and it's very still mournful. It's still a mournful experience when you go to see the body of Lenin, which is kind of interesting. The body is perfectly preserved, as if it were a saint of some kind. And he is a kind of saint. He's a secular saint. And he's perfectly preserved under glass, you know, like some kind of bird. It's a very strange sensation because the guards are still there holding sentinel. You are expected to be deeply reverential. And as you can see that, you know, the guard in the piece says, you know, tells him to be quiet because, you know, my translator is cracking jokes. Do you think they kept his dick, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, his brain is preserved for science. And you know, he's nattering away. While this same character is also the one that says, I love Russia. Of course, he's hammered out of his mind.
In a crowd of thugs and hoodlums, we mingle about. Sasha screams again, I love this country! I love Russia! He's drunk. There among the furs, among those vested thugs inside German cars, former KGB men all in the smoke cellars, selling single smokes, filthy keychains, old postcards, a limp pickle, a half bottle of Coca-Cola. Did you change? Does anything change, comrades? Bistro, bistro, mushroom, mushroom. Like those starving Napoleonic beggars. Does anything really change history, comrades? History! Comrades! History! Revolution is dead at 14. Not 65. A tiny hero's grave in Mother Russia's bosomed out heart, buried by the Kremlin pines outside the highest wall, sitting waiting to rise again. A mere child. Poor kid. A wisp of smoke that curls and dissolves into the bluish air. I write, and I write, and I write. I learn, and I learn, and I learn. What do I learn? What do I write? Woof, woof, woof. By Kremlin Wall, I look down towards the bottom of the hill, towards the end of the world, and I weep.
I had a lot of trouble with the structure itself because I wrote the original 4 pages. I usually write 3 or 4 pages, and then it becomes 10 or 12. And then I put it down for almost, I don't know how many years. And it was locked in my PC somewhere, and I was going through it and suddenly found it and decided that I would convert it to Microsoft. And then during that period of conversion, I started to rewrite it. Then I decided to put it on my website, and in that process I then had to, in a sense, complete it. But I was having a lot of work at the time, and I didn't have a lot of time, so I was working on it, trying to get it within a rewrite format until finally I ended up with this form. At 44, Andre is tall and lean, intelligent and kind. He's a biochemist. Intellectual once upon a time. Now artists are drinking tea without sugar, biochemists, doctors, politburo, scientific men, men of substance. Now these are the human trash, and we sweep the streets. Mr. Gorbachev, this wall must come down. Mr. Gorbachev, look what you did. Mr. Gorby, this wall must come down like Humpty Dumpty, and came down it did. To this, my ass, perestroika, my hairy ass.
Счастливые страдания всему народу нашему и моей семье. И таких семей были тысячи, десятки, сотни тысяч.
And there's no point writing it unless you have something to say. And there's no point doing it unless it's coming from some kind of cri de coeur. It has to come from some internal space. And so that internal space is the same space that will motivate acting, and that will motivate painting, that will motivate any art. And that internal space, poetry in some ways, is the purest form of that particular space other than music.
That awful winter in Leningrad, when we sit by the little park next to the mental hospital, Andrei tells me about his mother during the war, during the siege. She was a doctor, and every day she braved the shelling to go to the hospital and work without medicine, without bandages, without food. She worked, braving the pock-marked streets. We sit and talk of God and about the future of the world, of the earth. How do you remember God so well, I ask him. He replies, some things can't be forgotten, ever. Not even if they are converted and covered up as swimming pools and gymnasios, not even if they are pickled in formaldehyde. I see cardboard coffins at night float in the air among those ghostly fluffs that disappear and reappear, and they float above and beyond our tenements, past Tolstoy's white picketed house, above the city, brushing the flowering streets, gray rectangular.
Poetry is verbal and sound. The idea of poetry, which is sight, also does exist. And there is a whole kind of school of poetry that exists only to be read and not to be spoken out loud, to be seen in a kind of mental atmosphere.
My driver, Rajek, pulls his Lada over and laughs his Muslim laugh. What do you know? You know nothing, Amerikansky, of life or death, eating lamb with shredded teeth and mouth and writing again with his fingers, 6, 6, 6. Don't you get it? He signals and winks. A Stalin smile for me again and laughs again, deeper in that bass drum voice, deeper than the bomb's big Bertha German laughter, deeper even than all the knives wounding. For Lenin was the beast.
My generation was very much, I guess in a sense, had much more of a poetic pulse that we're talking now, because we had Jack Kerouac, we had Allen Ginsberg, and then we had Bob Dylan, we had Leonard Cohen. There was a whole, so Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was a poet, a published poet. You know, there was that kind of thing in the air where, you know, in a sense, sound and words still had some import. That's all disappeared now. And of course, you know, the beats, and, you know, there was a whole thing about poetry in that, in the 50s and the 60s. To be human is to be a poet, in my opinion. And a society without poets, an unpoetic landscape, a society without artists is not worth living in. As Socrates said about, you know, an unexamined life is not worth living, and I say very clearly that a society without artists is not worth being a part of. And a society that certainly squeezes its artists or oppresses its artists is also a society to be very carefully looked at.
Till Stalin sits up and listens. Till Stalin listens, sits up. It all sounds like cabbage, 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 cabbage in my head. We have to protect ourselves from these new Volga boatmen, Stalin shouts, mummified dirt dribbling from his mustache. These new Vikings of today. If we are to survive, Novoruski! New Russia! The hell with that! Shoot them all! Novoruskis, what are they? What are they? What are they? Swine in sheep's clothing! Shoot them! Shoot them! Shoot them all! Shoot them!
The last thing in the world you should be teaching in schools is poetry. It's not teachable. You should be exposed to it in a loving manner. The only reason my heart opened up to it is because my uncle exposed me to it. He didn't force it down my throat. He just opened these books and said, you know, if you're interested, take a look at that. Meanwhile, why don't you do this sculpture here? Meanwhile, why don't you learn this? And he was just, in a very gentle way, guided me to take that kind of stuff and put it in the strictures of a classroom. For the most part, turns everybody off, just like most kids are turned off Shakespeare. By the time they're out of high school, they don't even want to see Shakespeare again. And here's one of the great poets in human history, and can give them so much. And what happens? The very thing that should open them up shuts them down.
Last night I was in Moscow. I dreamt I returned to that horrid square. And I walked and I sat and I felt that sadness of sweet repose there by St. Basil's, where we all sat down and wept. With Sasha
Valentina, and Andrei, and Tanya, too, and little Vlada. And together, we as friends, we walked, marching to the oblong box inside, that undersea of cold and blue crystal. And beneath a pyramid of tears, we found him, sitting still, with a glass of tea and sugar between his teeth. And under a fleeting sky, we shuddered in recoil when he turned one preserved eye towards us. Vladimir Ilyich, wake up, please. Soon a stone-cold dawn will break. Vladimir Ilyich, Lenin, wake up, please. And that frozen corpse winked to us and said, now, comrades, what have you learned? What have you truly learned? I'm awake. I'm always awake. This nightmare is real. And in unison, we all replied, woof, woof, woof. True poetry has to be, as I say, is la voix humaine. It is the human voice, the voice of the heart, always, and the mind, but from the deepest sources, not sort of like I'm going to create an effect. But I can say one thing, which is that the space is clear, and I only write from that place. If I get into that particular headspace, or heart space, and I'm triggered by an image, a face, a glance, a walk, not dissimilar to what happens when I act, which is that I get triggered by a particular thing, then that one thing can then open up an entire world.